No, this can't be true. You're lying. That was my husband's elder sister, trembling, her voice slicing through the quiet living room like a blade. I remember standing there, holding the DNA envelope, the one they had forced me to order. My hands were steady strangely, steady while every face around the table burned with accusation. We want to test, they had demanded a week earlier. Everyone knows Daniel can't be your late husband's son. He didn't even look like him. They said it without shame, right in front of my boy. Daniel's small fingers had gripped my sleeve that day. He didn't cry. He just stared at the floor and whispered, "Mom, did I do something wrong?" That night, I sat beside him, stroking his hair, promising that truth never hides for long. Inside, I was shivering. My husband was gone-taken, far too early, and now his family was trying to erase the only piece of him I still had. When the envelope arrived, I invited them all. I wanted witnesses for everything. The afternoon light poured through the curtains, revealing faces both eager and cruel. I stood near the window, the scent of my husband's favorite coffee still in the air from that morning. "Open it," his brother hissed. "If you've got nothing to hide." So I did. I unfolded the crisp paper, and the printed words gleamed under the sunlight. Paternal DNA match, 99.99%. Probability of relationship confirmed. For a moment, silence stretched like a held breath. Then came the chaos gasps, whispers, tears. My son, my sweet boy, ducked his head into my arms, and I could finally breathe again. But just as I was about to put the report away, something caught my eye, a small extra line, faint but printed clearly, like a second door opening into a shadowed hallway. Note: unexpected genetic mismatch detected within recorded paternal lineage. I blinked. What did that mean? I looked up. Every face in the room had turned toward the eldest sister's husband, the man they called Uncle Greg. He had gone entirely pale. His lips moved, but no sound came. "Wait," I said, watching confusion bloom like frost. There's another section." My voice shook as I turned the page, reading out loud what no one expected to hear. According to extended marker comparisons, my husband's DNA didn't align perfectly with his supposed father's, records the patriarch of their proud, insistent family. For a breath, no one dared move. Only the ticking wall clock spoke in the stillness. "What is that supposed to mean?" someone whispered. I folded the paper slowly, meeting each gaze around me. "It means," I said, "steady now, that the man you call your father isn't biologically connected to all of you." The air collapsed into shock. My hands finally trembled, not from fear, but from something colder, justice maybe. Daniel pressed himself against me tighter, and for the first time since my husband's funeral, I felt the ghosts of this house growing quiet. The room stayed frozen in disbelief. No one spoke. No one breathed, as if the truth itself had sucked the oxygen right out of their lungs. Uncle Greg sat back, his chair creaking. The sunlight that once made the room warm now sliced in harsh, accusing lines across the marble floor. Finally, his sister, the same one who had first shouted at me, found her voice, though it came out cracked and small. That can't be right. Dad was the most honorable man we knew. He wouldn't," but the word wouldn't hung in the air. Trembling, I slipped the paper into its envelope again, my fingers brushing against the seal like it might burn. "These are laboratory records," I said quietly. "They don't lie, no matter how much any of us wish they would." Uncle Greg's face turned a shade of grey that scared me. He rubbed his temples, muttered something under his breath about old stories and mother's letters that no one ever saw. Then, abruptly, he stood up and stumbled toward the door. "I need air," he whispered, brushing past everyone. The rest followed him with their eyes, but no one dared to move. There was guilt in that silence. Guilt and something uglier, recognition. When at last they left, murmuring excuses, clutching their handbags like shields, the only sound left in the house was Daniel's slow, uneven breathing. "Mum," he said, looking up at me through those big brown eyes that still carried the softness of childhood. Why were they saying grandpa isn't grandpa? How do you explain to a child that adults spend their whole lives building stories around bloodlines and crumble when the story breaks? I knelt in front of him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Sometimes, I said carefully, truth hides for years, even from good people. But when it finally comes out, it doesn't mean love disappears. It just means we understand each other a little better. He nodded slowly, though I could tell he didn't fully grasp it. How could he? He was only 10, and already having to carry the weight of DNA and family shame that even grown-ups couldn't bear. After putting him to bed that night, the whole house felt heavier than ever. I sat by the window where my husband used to read the newspaper every morning. The moonlight slid over his empty chair, and a memory surfaced the day we first found out I was pregnant. He had cried. He, the man who never cried, had wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "Whatever happens, he'll be my son." Now I realized how fiercely true those words were. I picked up his old photo, the one from our wedding day. The same golden light spilling through them. The same quiet promise in his smile. "You always knew," I murmured, "and you never told them. You protected all of us, even from your own family." The next morning, my phone buzzed before sunrise. A number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a woman's trembling voice filled my ear. "Is this Mrs. Lennon? And Dr. Ruiz from the genetics lab? There's something we believe you deserve to know." That note about the mismatch. It wasn't fully explained in the initial summary. My stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" "There was an additional pattern," she said. "We usually only include it in internal data, but considering your situation, I felt obligated. The man listed as your late husband's father shares partial markers with you, not with him." I gripped the edge of the table. "With me?" "Yes," she said softly. "It's not typical, but it suggests a familial link between you and your husband's registered father's line. Possibly a distant cousin, several generations back. It's nothing to worry about medically, but it does confirm that something odd happened within their ancestry." I let out a shaky laugh. "So it runs in the family secrets on top of secrets." When I hung up, sunlight had just begun to creep over the horizon. A new day, the same house, the same silence, but the air felt cleaner somehow. Daniel came padding into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Are they still mad?" he asked. I shook my head with a small smile. "No, sweetheart. They're just learning what truth feels like." Outside, a car door slammed. I turned, and through the window, I saw Uncle Greg standing by the gate, clutching something in his hand. He looked older, gentler, almost humbled. He raised the object, it was an old photograph, and said quietly, "We need to talk. It's about my mother." And in that moment I knew this story wasn't over yet. It was just beginning to unfold, one buried secret at a time. I opened the door before he even knocked. Uncle Greg stood there in the cool morning light, eyes rimmed red, like someone who hadn't slept in days. He clutched a faded photograph, its corners worn and edges yellowed by decades of handling. "I found this," he said quietly, "in my mother's old sewing box. It was sealed inside an envelope labeled, 'For the day you need to understand.' I guess that day finally came." He held it out to me, and my fingers hesitated before touching it. The image showed a younger version of his mother, my husband's mother as I remembered from the old family portraits, but beside her was a man I didn't recognize. He had intense, kind eyes and stood far too close to her for a simple family friend. Greg's hands shook. "That's not Dad," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "At least, not the man we called Dad. This was taken about a year before she married him." The pieces started to connect, like a jigsaw I never wanted to solve. The DNA anomaly, the faint whisper in the laboratory report. It all pointed here. "Your mother had someone else," I said softly. He nodded, his throat working to form words. "She met him before the war. They were engaged. But he went missing. When he came back, she was already married to the man we called our father. But she kept his photo and she kept his letters. The dates match with when my brother, your husband, was born. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The world outside was quiet, except for the distant hum of someone mowing a lawn. Life going on as if truth hadn't just rewritten an entire generation's history. Greg wiped his eyes. I treated you horribly. We all did. We were so intent on protecting what little pride our family had. We forgot what made it family in the first place, love, not reputation. I didn't say anything. 1,000 emotions relief. Pain. A strange sympathy warred inside me. I had every reason to hate them, but looking into Greg's exhausted face, I saw the same confusion that had haunted me for years. I never meant to hurt Daniel, he continued. He looks like my mother's first love, now that I think about it. Those same eyes. That might be why everyone kept whispering that he looked different. I took a long breath. Then maybe he carries more of the truth than any of us realized. Greg half laughed, half sobbed. I just want him to grow up without this poison, the secrecy, the shame. We turned lies into tradition. Then stop it, I said gently. You have a chance to break it now. He nodded, then looked past me, through the doorway into the kitchen where Daniel was sketching at the table. Can I say hello to him? The question hit somewhere tender. Months ago, this man wanted to disown my son. Now he asked permission to greet him. Daniel looked up as Greg stepped inside. There was hesitation, then curiosity. Hi, Daniel said softly, clutching his pencil like a shield. Greg knelt beside him. Hey there, buddy. I guess I owe you an apology. I was wrong about a lot of things. Daniel frowned. Mom said sometimes grown-ups forget what truth feels like. Greg smiled faintly. She's right. I'm learning it again. The two of them stayed that way for a moment. Innocent child and a man trying to untangle. Decades of deceit, and I realized something vital. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a single decision. Maybe it was a chain reaction of truth shared one by one. After Greg left, I poured myself a cup of tea and went to the back porch. The morning air smelled like wet earth and new beginnings. I heard birds, cars, the world returning to normal. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. Then the phone rang a different ringtone. The one only the hospital used. My heart tripped. Daniel's pediatrician, Dr. Carlson, sounded hurried. Mrs. Lennon, good morning. I was reviewing Daniel's lab work from last year. Something you might want to double-check. It's about his rare blood marker. My hand tightened on the handle of the mug. What about it? Well, the doctor said, voice turning cautious. It's extremely rare, found in only a few genetic lines worldwide. One of them matched an archival database entry that's quite unusual. Do you by any chance have European relatives from southern Italy? Not that I know of, I said, frowning. Because according to this marker, he continued, Daniel's father or his father's family traces back to a branch we thought extinct since the 1800s. I don't know how, but this might go beyond regular ancestry. Someone in that family has been hiding much more than a name. The line clicked silent after his apology for medical curiosity, but my pulse wouldn't calm. An extinct bloodline. A secret family. I looked down at the teacup trembling in my hands, its surface rippling. Maybe, just maybe, the truth we'd uncovered so far was only the smallest piece of something, deeper and darker waiting beneath. The hospital hallway hummed with fluorescent light when I arrived. 1 hour earlier, I hadn't planned to leave the house at all. Now I was clutching Daniel's old medical file to my chest like a lifeline. The scent of antiseptic wrapped around me as I walked toward Dr. Carlson's office. He looked up from his computer, clearly surprised. Mrs. Lennon, I didn't mean to alarm you. It's nothing dangerous, just historically strange. Strange, I repeated. That's never a comforting word. I sat down, feeling the stiff fabric of the chair beneath my palms. The doctor rotated his screen toward me. This is Daniel's rare blood marker, H72. Fewer than 100 known carriers in global datasets. most from a forgotten Italian lineage recorded in 1890. Out of curiosity, I cross-checked with genealogy registries. One hit appeared. Your late husband's great-grandfather's mother had the same marker. The record lists her as an adopted child from Genoa, raised by a British family after a shipwreck. For a moment the room swam. A shipwreck. Adopted. So, the mismatched DNA had roots, stretching far beyond you as a secret tangled in centuries. So Daniel's blood didn't appear from nowhere, I murmured. He nodded. It resurfaced like something old remembering itself. That phrase clung to me as I left the office. The city wind felt sharper, the sky painfully bright. The truth wasn't haunting our family. It was echoing through it. Back home, I found Greg waiting on the porch steps, a paper bag beside him. I called Aunt Sophie, he said softly. She's 92. Barely remembers her own name, but she said something odd when I mentioned the photograph. She said, "The sea always sends its children back." Does that mean anything to you? I shook my head. Not yet. But maybe we're finally hearing the language of our ghosts. He smiled sadly. You sound like my brother. He used to say destiny hides in our blood until we earn it. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, I opened a small wooden chest that belonged to my husband. Inside was a pocket watch, still ticking faintly despite the years. Engraved inside its lid were initials I had never noticed before. Not my husband's, not his father's. Beneath them, a single date. 1978. I ran my thumb over the markings. 1978. I ran my thumb over the markings. 1978. The same decade of the shipwreck Dr. Carlson had mentioned. A cold shiver traveled up my spine. The next morning, Greg and I took the photograph and the watch to an old local historian named Mrs. Dent. Her tiny shop smelled of dust and time. She adjusted her glasses, studying the items. This man, she said, tapping the photo, is wearing an Italian naval uniform from before World War I and FM. Those could be his initials. Do we know who he was? I asked. She rummaged through an ancient ledger and stopped at a page yellowed by salt. Francesco Moroni, she read aloud, her voice trembling. Ship's surgeon. Lost at sea in 1891, rescued months later, but never returned home. Records end there. Greg leaned forward. Francesco Moroni. Lenin, Moroni. He frowned. The sounds changed, but the root's the same. Mrs. Dent looked up. Names evolve when people want to hide. Outside, the wind lifted dead leaves into tiny spirals. I stared at the photo again. The man's eyes, gentle, determined, looked hauntingly familiar. Daniel's eyes. By evening, when we reached home, the air felt thick, charged with too many discoveries. I tucked the watch back into its box and sat beside Daniel. He was coloring a map of the world, blue oceans spreading wide under his crayons. Mom, he asked without looking up, do you ever think some stories never end? They just keep telling themselves through new people. I almost laughed through my tears. Yes, I whispered. I think that's exactly what's happening. He nodded seriously, placing a bright red heart in the middle of the ocean. Then maybe the sea is where our family started. I brushed his hair, feeling something inside me unclench. All this time, I had tried to defend the past-proved memories, guard reputations. Yet my child, without understanding half of it, had given the perfect answer. The secrets weren't curses. They were currents, pulling us back toward honest waters. But as night fell and I checked my phone, a single new voicemail appeared. It was Dr. Ruiz again, her voice urgent this time. Mrs. Lennon, please call when you can. There's been an update from the International Genetics Archive. The sample connected to your husband's line. Someone else just logged a match. And this one's not from the past. It's from a living person, right here in the US. The voicemail replayed in my head all night like a broken record. Someone else just logged a match. Living person. US. Those words threaded through my dreams until dawn bruised the sky with pale orange light. By 7 a.m., I was pacing the kitchen, phone in hand, heart thudding against my ribs. I finally called Dr. Ruiz back. She answered immediately, too quickly, as if waiting for me. Mrs. Lennon, I hope I didn't frighten you, but yes, another DNA sample with your husband's family markers appeared in our database yesterday. Whose? We can't disclose personal data without consent, she said, but the individual left a note inviting direct family contact. They believe they might be related to Daniel. A pause. I could hear papers shuffling on her desk. Then softly. The address listed is in Maine. The person's name is Marina Brooks. Does that mean anything? No, I whispered. Not yet. By noon, Greg had insisted he come along. You can't go chasing mysterious DNA connections alone, he said, climbing into the passenger seat like a self-appointed guard he'd somehow become. The drive north rolled past fading autumn fields and long stretches of ocean. For hours we rode mostly in silence, until the first view of Rocky Coast appeared, sea foam hammering the cliffs. Maine smelled like salt and pine, sharp and awake. The GPS led us to a weather-worn cottage perched over the water. A woman stood outside before we even stopped the car, as if she'd known precisely when we would arrive. Short silver hair, bright eyes, delicate posture, a mirror of my husband's mother in her later years. She looked instantly familiar in a way that sent a sting up my spine. You must be Eleanor Lennon, she said, voice steady but full of tremor underneath. And this must be your brother-in-law, Gregory. Greg flinched. How could you possibly know that? Marina smiled faintly. Because my grandmother wrote about you both. Her name was Sophia Maroni. She had a brother who disappeared across the Atlantic before World War. His name was Francesco. The name hit like a bell. I'm his great-granddaughter, she continued. We thought he drowned, but clearly, he didn't. I've spent 10 years tracing the missing branch of our tree. Last month I found a photograph online. Your family posted it in an old obituary. The eyes matched. She led us inside. The cottage was a museum of memory photos, sea charts, weathered journals. On the mantel sat a brass compass engraved with FM identical to our watch. I have the twin, Marina said gently. His ship's surgeon kit was recovered years later off Nova Scotia. The compass was inside. Greg exhaled, staring at the proof of decades of conjecture. So, our family, your family, they split when that ship went down. Yes, and all the bitterness afterward came from not knowing the truth. She touched the compass like it was alive. My grandmother said Francesco's choice to disappear wasn't cowardice. He wanted to protect someone. A pregnant woman he could never marry because of class. That explanation sliced through everything. My mind replayed our DNA test day, the accusation, the shame. All of it born from one man's silence, an old act of love that had twisted into generations of misunderstanding. When we finally stepped outside again, the sea wind caught my hair, carrying the faint tang of rain. Marina joined us at the cliff's edge, pointing toward the horizon. He wrote that the ocean keeps stories, not secrets. Every wave brings something back, truth, or people who can bear it. Daniel, who'd been quiet all day, slipped his hand into mine. Does that mean we're sailors too? I smiled. Maybe in our hearts. Marina looked down at him warmly. He has Francesco's eyes, she said. That means the sea didn't forget us. As sunset flooded the water crimson, Greg lifted his camera. One for the real family record, he murmured. For the first time, family didn't sound divided by blood but mended by it. That night, before sleeping in the small guest room overlooking the Atlantic, I stood by the window. The ocean hissed and breathed like something alive. My husband's voice seemed to flicker through it. Whatever happens, he'll be my son. Maybe that was the truth the sea had been carrying all along. Not about paternity or names, but love resilient enough to outlast every lie. And yet, as I turned off the light, my phone buzzed again. A new message from Dr. Ruiz. This one contained just 2 words and a file link. Unidentified relative pending verification. Beneath it, a note. This sample matches your son's DNA even closer than his father's. The message echoed in my head long after the screen dimmed. Unidentified relative pending verification. That phrase was like a pebble dropped into calm. Water nothing but ripples. Spreading wider, deeper, endless. Morning light seeped through the curtains of the guest room. Grey and cold. The Atlantic hissed outside like it was, trying to whisper the answer before I asked the question. My first thought was Danielle. Second was, what if this wasn't over at all? Greg was already awake, standing by the porch railing with a mug of coffee. You saw it too? He asked without turning. Yes, he nodded grimly. So, someone else with an even closer DNA match than your husband. What does that even mean? It means, I said quietly, that truth never stays buried, not even under generations. We said goodbye to Marina with hugs instead of promises. She pressed the compass into my palm before we left. Keep it, she said. Maybe it'll point you where the story still wants to go. The drive back was silent again. That kind of silence that hums inside your bones. I kept replaying Dr. Ruiz's note, every letter of it glowing behind my eyes. When we reached home, a new email waited in my inbox. The subject line: Confidential Extended Marker Report. I clicked. PDF page. Charts. And then a line that stopped the world cold. Genetic affinity indicates a 99.995% relationship between Daniel Lennon and subject 47C likely. First degree. Parental or identical twin descendant. My breath hitched. First degree. Meaning either another parent or a sibling close enough to be impossible. Greg, I whispered, throat tightening. This says Daniel's genetic match isn't just family. It's someone almost identical. He frowned. A twin? That's impossible. You'd know if he had one, would I? I murmured, eyes darting to the old photographs on the mantel. My pregnancy had been complicated. I delivered early, unconscious for hours. My husband had never once spoken about what happened in those missing hours. Greg took the printout. His jaw tightened. We need to call Dr. Ruiz. When we reached her, she sighed heavily, as though already burdened. Mrs. Lennon, please keep calm. We're still verifying. The other sample subject 47C was submitted anonymously through a private lab in Oregon. They didn't reveal motive, just a note. Searching for my twin. The room spun. Twin, I repeated. He's 10. Are you telling me there's another child somewhere? It's possible, Ruiz said, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes, in rare medical scenarios, one twin can be declared stillborn under distress. But if the record wasn't properly archived, it could happen that both survived separated before registration. Greg's face drained of color. But why would anyone hide that? Ruiz hesitated. Sometimes people try to save one child at any cost. There can be decisions made in chaos. But whoever submitted that sample, they knew what they were looking for. When I finally hung up, my hands were trembling. 10 years believing I had one child. 10 years of birthdays, photographs, lullabies, and maybe somewhere out there, another heartbeat had matched his all along. That night, I couldn't sleep. I watched Daniel breathe in the dim glow of his nightlight, his chest rising and falling in rhythm with the tide beyond the window. I opened the compass Marina had given me. Its needle trembled, pointing steadily west, exactly where Oregon would lie if I stretched the map straight across. In that instant, the house no longer felt safe. It felt like a waiting room between worlds. The truth was heading our way, carried by bloodlines and time zones, and I had no choice but to follow wherever it led. The next morning, I packed our bags. Greg didn't argue, just handed me the car keys. "Then let's go find the rest of our story," he said. And as the car rolled onto the highway, the ocean receding behind us, a quiet realization settled in my chest. The test they demanded to erase my son had, instead, created a path to every secret they'd ever tried to bury. We drove west for 2 straight days, chasing a ghost across the map. Daniel sat in the back seat humming softly to himself, drawing in his sketchbook. The same waves, the same heart in the ocean. Greg handled most of the driving, while I stared out the window, half afraid of what the compass would do if I looked at it again. By the time we crossed into Oregon, the rain had joined us. Thin grey sheets streamed down the windshield, turning the world into drifting watercolor. At every rest stop, I checked my email. No news, no update. Only that one message from Dr. Ruiz, bold and unanswered, waiting like a quiet dare, searching for my twin. Port Clegg was a small coastal town, salt in the air and gulls screaming overhead. The address from the report led to a modest, white and blue clinic tucked between pine trees. A local genealogist worked there part-time, Ruiz had said. That's who forwarded the mysterious sample. Inside, a young receptionist looked up. "Mrs. Lennon?" "Yes, you're expected." She handed me a sealed envelope. "They left this for you yesterday morning." No name, no note, just thick paper and a return logo of the lab. My fingers slipped under the flap. A letter greeted me, neat, deliberate handwriting. "If this reaches you, then what I feared is true. You have Daniel. I have Ethan. The hospital lied to both of us. I was told my baby didn't survive. I only discovered the error when I donated DNA for a research study. My contact number and photo are enclosed. Please don't be angry. I only want to meet my son's brother. Lavra Pierce. Ethan. A second name." My vision blurred so fast I barely saw the small photograph tucked behind the letter. A boy with sandy hair, smiling shyly, eyes Daniel's eyes. Greg read over my shoulder, his voice cracking. "This happens in stories, not real life," he muttered. The receptionist pretended not to watch as tears found their way down my cheeks. For 10 years, another woman had mourned what I had held every night. For 10 years, I'd wondered why my husband never spoke about the day Daniel was born. Outside, the storm had turned wilder. Waves hammered the coast, spraying mist across the street as we ran back to the car. Daniel was half asleep in the back seat, clutching his toy sailboat. I slid the letter under my coat as if it might dissolve. "What do we do now?" Greg asked. I stared at Daniel's reflection in the glass. "We meet her," I said, "and we get answers before this story breaks under our feet." We arranged to see Laura the next day in a cafe by the sea. All night the wind battered the windows. I barely blinked. My brain replayed every birth record, every hospital face, every absence my husband had never explained. Morning came raw and grey. The cafe smelled of espresso and rain-damp wood. Lavra arrived quietly. She was younger than I'd expected, 30-something, with auburn hair tied in a knot, and a nervous smile trembling at the edges. When our eyes met, the world thinned to nothing but recognition. 2 mothers, bound by one unimaginable mistake. She held out her phone, showing a short video a boy about Daniel's age waving at the camera, missing his front tooth. "He's been asking about his brother since I told him," she said softly. "He doesn't stop until he understands." I swallowed hard. Then maybe we should let them understand together. Outside, the clouds broke just enough to let a burst of golden light fall across the sea. Daniel's laughter drifted from the car where Greg kept him occupied, unaware that his world was about to rewrite itself again. As I stood there with Lavra, 2 mothers staring at a single horizon, I realized the truth had finally chosen its keepers. It wasn't in labs or paper trails anymore. It lived inside every heartbeat we were brave enough to uncover. When Daniel first saw Ethan, neither of them spoke. It was as if the air itself halted. Hums from the cafe fading into the hush of disbelief. The two boys stared at each other, same height, same eyes, same tiny scar on the chin, and then, without a word, Daniel broke into a grin. Ethan mirrored it instantly. The next moment they laughed together, light, pure, contagious, and the tension that had wrapped my chest for weeks cracked open. Lara pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely. She wasn't crying from guilt anymore. It was astonishment, or maybe the first real peace she'd had in 10 years. "They look like mirrors," Greg whispered beside me. "They are," I said quietly, unable to take my eyes off them. Two reflections finally in the same room. We spent the afternoon together. The boys drew matching ships on napkins. They argued about superheroes and traded toy cars as if they'd known each other forever. Every time Daniel turned to check if I was watching, Ethan turned too, both flashing identical mischievous smiles. Lara told me her side of the story. The day of the birth, she had delivered 2 premature infants at the same hospital. One boy declared stillborn, one healthy. Her husband was overseas, unreachable. In the chaos, her chart had been attached to my name instead. "They said the other child hadn't survived," she whispered, voice shaking. I believed them. For a decade, the hospital's record room had long been digitized and replaced. Half the paper files were destroyed in a flood 8 years earlier. Proof was gone, but truth didn't need proof anymore. It was sitting in front of us, giggling over spilled cocoa. When evening came, we walked out to the boardwalk together. The ocean lapped at the shore, serene now after days of storm. Daniel and Ethan leaned over the railing, tossing breadcrumbs to the gulls. Lara turned to me with uncertain eyes. "I'm not sure what happens next. I don't want to intrude on your life." "You're not intruding," I said. "You're part of it." I paused, searching for words. Maybe the doctors and files mixed everything up, but maybe the sea had its own plans. It found a way to bring us back together. Greg, ever the watcher, took another photograph. Sunlight painting gold halos over 2 identical heads of hair. "Add this one to the real family album," he said. Later that night, we gathered at Laura's small rented cottage. The boys fell asleep on the floor after inventing a game with seashells and markers. In the quiet, Lara opened a brown envelope from her purse. Inside were 2 certificates, both incomplete, each missing one crucial name in the parent column. "They never fixed it," she said bitterly. "It's like the system wanted to erase simplicity." I looked at Daniel's sleeping face. "Then we'll fix it ourselves. Together?" she asked. "Together," I confirmed. As we talked, I heard the small rhythm of the waves outside softer than before, like the ocean had settled after delivering a message. By dawn, when the first streak of light touched the curtains, everything in me felt quieter. Somehow, amidst all the loss and shock, a larger sense of wholeness had begun to bloom. Before leaving for the hotel, I wrote a message to Dr. Ruiz. Update. The unknown relative has been found. Case closed for science, maybe. But for us, it's the beginning of something human. I pressed send, then turned toward the sea one last time. Ethan and Daniel were already awake, racing along the edge of the water, their reflections merging in the tide like 2 halves of one soul. For the first time since my husband's death, there were no shadows left to chase, only sunlight stretching wide across the horizon, like a promise finally kept. A week later, everything that had once felt impossible had become strangely normal. Lara and Ethan stayed in a small rental near our neighborhood. Daniel begged every morning to see his brother. The laughter in the house seemed louder, ceilings higher, air clearer. Every time the boys dashed through the hallway, I felt years of heaviness shake off the walls. But reality couldn't stay gentle forever. I woke one morning to find an email from a legal agency, Langston and Miles Attorney Services. Subject line: Parental Records Inquiry. It took me 3 tries to open it. "Dear Mrs. Lennon, we have been retained by the Pierce family to review medical irregularities related to the birth of their son, Ethan Pierce, on April 14, 2015. Our preliminary findings indicate potential negligence by Harbour State Hospital. We request your cooperation during the audit. Both you and Mrs. Laura Pierce may be entitled to compensation or public disclosure rights. Greg looked over my shoulder. Compensation? Public disclosure? That means headlines. And you know what headlines do? I nodded slowly. They turn miracles into gossip. By noon, Lara arrived, holding the same email. I didn't ask for this, she said, terrified. My parents got involved. They think we should sue. But I don't want to drag the boys through lawyers and cameras. They don't need another storm, I answered. We decided to visit the hospital together before any lawyers could. The building had been renovated twice, walls painted sterile white, but somewhere behind those new surfaces hid every mistake that rewrote our lives. The administrator, a grey-haired man named Weldon, greeted us warily. We've heard from your counsel, he said. If this is an official complaint, it's not, I interrupted. We just want to know how it happened. He led us to the archive wing. Boxes of surviving paper files stacked in neat silence. Weldon pointed at a thin folder. The microfilm from 2015 was corrupted, but this photocopy survived. Inside, we found 2 pages birth records back to back, both missing a hospital stamp. One labeled Infant A, the other Infant B. Lara whispered, I was Infant A's mother, and I was Infant B's. I finished. Scrawled across the top in fading pen. Ward merged temporary holding. Beneath, a nurse's signature. Margaret Ruiz. I froze. Ruiz? The same surname as our geneticist. Weldon nodded. She was our maternity supervisor then. Retired years ago, but her daughter works in genetics now, I believe. My knees felt weak. Fate wasn't random. It was weaving patterns through names and decades. We tracked down an address for retired Margaret Ruiz and reached her that evening. She lived in a small, ivy-covered house outside town, a garden of lily trembling in the breeze. She opened the door already holding a photo, 2 newborns swaddled side by side. I thought you'd come someday, she said before we even spoke. Her story spilled in fragments. A power failure in the maternity ward. Emergency transfers. Paperwork lost and rewritten by candlelight while alarms deafened the halls. By dawn, the names had blurred. One baby was listed as deceased, the other discharged. I begged them to check twice, she said, tears glistening. But the records unit was shut down during the merger. I kept this photo as proof, just in case someone searched. Lara gripped my hand, trembling. All these years? Because of a blackout? Because of people scrambling in fear? Margaret corrected softly. Fear hides truth faster than any darkness. She pressed the photograph into my hand. I can't fix what was broken, but maybe this helps you keep what's whole now. Outside, dusk painted the sky burnt orange. The boys were waiting in the car, faces pressed to the window. When they saw the photo, they waved, their fingers forming identical awkward hearts against the glass. Greg exhaled. So that's it then. The official truth. I looked at the picture one last time. 2 tiny boys who had already found their way back to each other despite the world's mistakes. No, I said quietly. That's not it. That's just where truth finally learned how to breathe. And as we drove away from the house, twilight spreading like soft ink over the coast, I realized the compass I carried no longer needed to point anywhere. It had led us here to completion, to forgiveness, to the place where lost stories end and living ones begin. In the weeks that followed, the world seemed to slow down as if life itself was trying to let all the scattered fragments settle into place. The phone stopped buzzing, the legal letters faded into the background, and our families, mine and Laura, started meeting every weekend at the pier. Daniel and Ethan turned the boardwalk into their kingdom. They chased each other through the mist, collected shells, built fortresses of driftwood. Every time their laughter rose above the waves, I felt the past loosen its grip on all of us. We held a small ceremony on the beach one chilly morning. Only the four of us, Greg. And the sea. No speeches, no lawyers, no officials, just two mothers, two sons, and a simple wooden box in which we placed the photograph of the newborns and the watch engraved. FM 1978. Lavra set the box gently on the sand. For the years we lost, she whispered. And for the years they'll build, I added. Greg filmed quietly from a distance. Not for the internet this time, but for family, real family. The tide touched the box and drew away, leaving a shallow reflection in its wake. Afterward, we walked along the shoreline, the boys darting ahead. Do you ever wish things had been different? Lavra asked suddenly. I thought of the tests, the anger, the screams in that living room months ago, of the envelope that had started everything. Sometimes, I admitted. But if things were different, I might never have met you. She opened the door,
or known
already
him,
holding,
I nodded toward.
Ethan. Photo 2
And Daniel would
newborns
have grown up
swaddled
missing
side by
half of
side.
himself.
She smiled faintly, wind tugging her hair across her face. You sound like you've forgiven everyone. Not everyone, I said. But enough to breathe again. Back at the cottage, Greg handed me the camera. Keep this one. It's the ending you earned. On the screen, the footage showed the twins running toward the surf, light catching in their hair, a mirror image on both sides of the frame. The next day, I returned the compass to Marina in Maine. She hugged me tight, whispering, the sea brought them together. Now let it rest. I placed the compass on her mantle, beside the old journals of Francesco Maroni, the man whose choices had unknowingly written the prologue to our lives. When I returned home, something inside felt still. There were no unanswered voicemails, no sealed envelopes waiting to detonate. The house smelled of coffee and crayons, of ordinary mornings. Daniel ran up, waving a drawing, two boys building a giant ship labeled The Truth. Can we really make one like this, Mom? He asked. Maybe someday, I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. But for now, we keep sailing the one we've already built. That night, as moonlight spilled across the living room, I sat at the table and began writing everything down, every call, every clue, every wave of grief and wonder. It wasn't for an audience or a lawyer. It was for them. So one day they'd understand how hard love had fought to find itself. When I finished, I opened the window. A cold rush of ocean air filled the room, carrying the faint echo of my husband's favorite phrase. Whatever happens, he'll be my son. Now, I thought, he's not just your son. He's ours, two mothers, two brothers, bound not by bloodlines alone, but by the courage to face what blood revealed. Out on the horizon, two small lights blinked. From the harbor, a pair of boats crossing paths before heading home. I watched until their reflections merged into one. This time, the sea didn't whisper secrets. It simply breathed, content at last, humming the soft rhythm of a story that had finally found its ending. Months passed, and the storm that had once consumed every heartbeat gradually turned into quiet background hum. Normal life returned, but it was a new kind of normal, stitched together from forgiveness and rediscovery. Every Friday, Lavra and Ethan came over for dinner. The boys set the table faster than I could call them, laughing at their own little inside jokes. Greg had turned his obsession with documenting everything into something beautiful. He started an online photo journal titled, Where Truth Found Us. It wasn't sensational, just moments, tiny, honest miracles. Two boys painting a fence, two mothers sharing coffee, the ocean behind them, endless and forgiving. Spring crept in. Yellow blossoms lined the road that led to our house. Daniel's room filled with books about ships and constellations. She opened the door, already Ethan wanted to be a marine biologist. Photo 2 Their dreams were already brushing against the same horizon that had first bound them. Then one morning, a letter arrived, not through email, but in a real envelope, postmarked from overseas. The return address read, Ruiz Genetics, Lisbon branch. I frowned, heart skipping. Inside was a handwritten note from Dr. Ruiz herself. Mrs. Lennon, I'm stepping down from my position this year. I needed to tell you something beyond official reports. My late mother, Margaret, dedicated her life to atoning, For that hospital night in 2015. When you met her, she told me afterward she finally forgave herself. She passed away peacefully 2 weeks later. Before she died, she asked me to deliver these documents to you, copies of every surviving birth record, now verified. But she also left a personal note. Tell them the truth was never meant to break them. It was meant to bring them home. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I closed the letter, breathed deeply, and called Lavra. We met at the beach that afternoon, both clutching copies of the same delicate paper. The sea was calm, oddly so, as though it too was listening. She made peace, Lavra whispered. So maybe we can too. We already did, I said softly. This is just the world catching up. The boys chased each other down the shoreline, footsteps sinking into wet sand. They'd grown taller, more self-assured. Watching them, I felt a strange gratitude even for the chaos. It had forced us into something luminous, something unshakable. Greg joined us with 2 cups of coffee. You know, he said, smiling, I never believed the sea could keep a promise. But I think it just did. Lavra laughed through her tears. And it took 3 generations, a DNA test, and a compass to prove it. The sky turned lavender as evening fell. I looked at my phone's recording app, thumb hovering over the button. It had started as a way to narrate my pain. Now I wanted to capture peace. This is our final entry, I said aloud. The story of how truth doesn't destroy families, it rebuilds them. Lavra placed her hand over mine. Say it for both of us. So I did. I told the story from the beginning. How accusation led to redemption. How science met faith. How bloodlines bent just enough for love to come through. The wind carried my voice over the waves, blending it with the rhythm of the tide. When I finished, the world felt lighter. The boys waved from the rocks, shouting about some treasure they'd found, a rusted coin, glinting faintly in the fading sun. Lavra smiled. See? Even the sea gives rewards now. We laughed, arms intertwined, and for a long golden moment, no one said anything more. Words had done their work. The rest belonged to silence and salt air. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another wave gathered and broke, carrying Francesco Moroni's legacy forward generation after generation. Not as a mystery, but as a melody. And for the first time, I realized the story hadn't truly ended at all. It had simply learned how to live. Mom, what happened to the compass? Daniel's voice snapped me from my thoughts. I smiled faintly. It's where it belongs, sweetheart by the sea. Lavra and Ethan had come over for dinner again, but tonight felt different. The air held that strange tension that comes before a big change. We all knew something lingered, some last corner of truth still unturned. Greg set down his coffee. You two haven't checked Dad's old cabin yet, have you? I frowned. The one by the lighthouse. It's been locked for years. Maybe it's time, he said quietly. The next morning, mist rolled off the coast like a curtain. Daniel ran ahead with Ethan, shouting, "Last one to the lighthouse buys ice cream." The cabin stood small and weather-beaten, wood silvered by years of salt. The padlock looked ancient, but the key from my husband's toolbox fit perfectly, like it had been waiting. Inside, dust motes floated in long beams of light. On the table lay a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Lavra tugged at it, revealing letters, dozens of them tied with fraying twine. Her voice trembled. "They're addressed to you. I read the first. My husband's handwriting neat, patient. If you're reading this, it means the truth has found its way home." I couldn't speak about Daniel's birth, not while my own family still lived under their old lies. But I want you to know, I never doubted he was ours. I stayed silent to protect you from battles I couldn't win. Tears blurred the ink. Lavra touched my arm gently. He knew. He always knew. Greg unfolded another page, reading aloud in a low, rough voice. "If one day 2 boys find each other, tell them the sea remembered first. I saw it in a dream the night Daniel was born, 2 stars rising together. I thought it was grief. It was prophecy." Daniel peeked from behind the doorway. Mom, what's prophecy? Daniel peeked from behind the doorway. Mom, what's prophecy? I wiped my eyes, smiling through the ache. It's when someone dreams of the future before it happens. He grinned. Then Dad dreamed about us. Yes, I whispered. About all of us. Laura sank onto the old bench, letter pressed to her chest. How does one man carry so much? By loving more than he feared, Greg murmured. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't empty. It vibrated with warmth, like voices of people we couldn't see. Ethan brushed dust off a painting leaned against the wall. The same ocean view, 2 childish figures drawn in pencil at the bottom. He squinted. That's us. Lara laughed through her tears. Looks like he painted your meeting long before it happened. I placed the last letter back into its bundle and tied the twine. Let's leave them here. This room kept his truth safe. It can keep his peace too. On the way out, the wind caught the door, flinging it wide. Papers fluttered, sunlight glinting on salt crystals scattered across the floor, like the sea itself had blessed the memory. Side by side. Outside, Daniel reached for my hand. So, Mom, story finished? I looked down at him, at Ethan beside him, their fingers sticky from melting ice cream, their laughter weaving through the sound of waves. No, I said softly. Stories like ours don't finish. They just wait for the next voice to tell them again. Lara sighed, smiling. Then let's promise to keep telling it no matter how many waves come. The lighthouse bell rang in the distance, distant and clear, mixing with a cry of gulls. The sea shimmered patient, forgiving, endless. And for the first time, our voices, all of us, rose together above the wind, bright and unafraid, as if even the ocean wanted to listen. Mom, you think Dad can hear us from heaven? Daniel asked. His voice broke the silence of the porch. The sky was melting into shades of orange, and the twins were tossing a softball between them. I smiled, half at him, half at the question. I think he hears everything worth hearing. Ethan threw the ball back, missing Daniel by a mile. Then he just heard you call me slow turtle. Daniel rolled his eyes. That was yesterday. Greg laughed from the steps. Relax, sailors. Let the sea referee this one. Lara set 2 mugs of coffee on the small wooden table. I swear they've got energy stored from another planet. They get it from the ocean, I said. It feeds on noise. For a moment, the 4 of us just listened. Gulls calling, waves folding. Then Laura's tone dropped softer. Eleanor, do you ever hate the past for taking so long to tell us the truth? I shook my head slowly. Sometimes, yeah. But if it had come earlier, maybe we would have broken instead of healing. She looked down at her mug. I used to think justice meant revenge. Now I think it just means peace. Greg lifted his camera, trying to capture the glow. Peace is hard to film. He grinned. Then stop filming it, I said lightly. Just live it. He lowered the camera, smiling. Fair enough. Daniel ran up, holding a seashell. Look, it's shaped like a heart. Ethan gasped dramatically. It's proof. The ocean loves us. Lara laughed. Well, it certainly worked hard to reunite you two. The boys sat down between us, breathless. Daniel asked, Can Ethan sleep over again? Tomorrow's Monday, I reminded him. Then he'll go late to school, Daniel said with a shrug. Ethan nodded. We'll blame traffic, Greg smirked. Future politicians, both of them. The air smelled of salt and grilled food. No noise except cutlery, laughter, the small knocking of waves below the deck. Lara said softly, I saw Margaret Ruiz's obituary this morning. Her daughter sent flowers. I looked at her. She found peace in the end. That matters. Lara nodded. It does. Daniel yawned. Mom, when do stories end? Never. She opened the door, I said quickly, already holding. They just find new voices. Ethan leaned against him, swaddled side by side. Then we'll tell it next. I brushed their hair out of their eyes. Promise? Promise, they chorused. Lara smiled at them, eyes shining. These two will grow up thinking life is one long puzzle with happy endings. Greg stood stretching. Good, let them. The world could use people like that. The twins ran back down to the sand, chasing the fading waves. Their laughter rolled across the shore. It sounded like freedom. Lavra turned to me. Eleanor, do you ever miss the mystery? I thought about it. Really thought. Then answered, not anymore. I just miss the people we used to be before we were brave enough to find the truth. She squeezed my hand. Bravery costs a lot, huh? Everything, I said with a small smile. And somehow it gives it back too. The wind picked up. Cool and alive. The boys shouted something about building a new fort before sundown. Their voices carried above the surf clear, fearless. Greg murmured from behind, there's your ending, Ellie. Not a sentence. Just that sound. I didn't argue. I just watched the twins running through the tide, silhouettes against the dim light, turning every broken piece of our story into laughter. For once, we didn't talk about the past. We only listened to them, to the sea, to the soft rhythm of a life finally whole. Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen table. Toast crumbs, cereal boxes, spilled juice chaos that sounded like home. Ethan was explaining the laws of sea dragons to Daniel. Rule 1. Never sail east without snacks. Rule 2. Daniel added instantly. Never tell moms about Rule 1. Lavra, laughing, raised an eyebrow. Too late. The moms know everything. Not everything, Greg muttered, sipping coffee. I still don't get how we wound up, living in a house that's one storm away from becoming a boat dealership. The twins burst into giggles. The conversation was meaningless and perfect. After months of revelations and heartbreak, normal talk felt like magic. For the first time, no one was waiting for a call, a letter, or a lab result. Later that afternoon, we took the boys to the lighthouse trail, same one where we'd opened the old cabin. The wind smelled of pine and salt. The sky was clear, water flashing silver. Daniel ran ahead, calling, "Race you to the top, Ethan. You'll lose," Ethan yelled, already halfway up the slope. Lavra laughed, leaning against the railing. I hope they never outgrow this. They won't, I said quietly. The world will pull them apart here and there, but they'll always find back. Greg adjusted his camera strap. Speaking from experience, huh? I smiled. Exactly. When we reached the top, the view swung open, the town behind us. Endless ocean ahead. The twins leaned over the railing, hair whipping like twin banners. Mom, look at the boats, Daniel shouted. I see them, I called back. Ethan pointed toward a fishing trawler on the horizon. That one looks like it's chasing the sun, swaddled side by side. Lavra caught her breath. Can you imagine the courage it takes to go that far and still come back? Yeah, I said softly. But we did, didn't we? She nodded, eyes misted. We did. Greg filmed a short clip, lowering the volume, so only the sound of the wind came through. For the archive, he said. One last frame, back down by the shore. The boys started collecting smooth stones. Daniel handed one to Ethan. Let's keep these forever. If we drop one, the other has to find it. Deal? Deal, Ethan said. If the sea takes it, we swim. Lavra whispered, half afraid and half proud. They talk like sailors already. I watched them wade ankle deep into the surf, their reflections twisting together with every ripple. Maybe that's good. Maybe the sea belongs to them now. We stood there a long time, just breathing, just watching. There was no grand speech left to make. No mystery left to solve. Daniel suddenly called, Mom, watch this. He and Ethan flung their stones high. They landed together with a single splash, water glittering in twin arcs before dissolving into the tide. Lavra murmured, perfect aim. I nodded. Perfect ending. Greg lowered his camera. No edits, no soundtrack. Just let it fade here, okay? No one disagreed. The boys ran ahead, hands brushing the waves. We walked behind them without hurry, the salt air sharp and kind. The sea glittered beneath the sun, humming its steady song, the same old lullaby that had carried fears, secrets, and now a family reborn. Lavra nudged my shoulder. You ever think about how small we are next to all this? All the time, I said, smiling. That somehow it still heard us. Daniel turned back, shouting against the wind. Mom, come on. We joined them, our footprints pressing into wet sand and vanishing just as quickly washed clean, like everything that had ever tried to break us. And when the next wave rolled in, I realized it wasn't an ending at all. It was simply life full, loud, untidy rolling forward, exactly as it should.